Just run through what your thoughts are on what's been happening with Brexit, and in particular the Prime Minister's handling of the Brexit negotiations.
Well, look, I don't want to presume to give anyone in Britain free advice from Australia. We hate it when it comes the other way around. But nonetheless, the world is watching this catastrophe, unfolding catastrophe, very closely. And I've worked on the inside of government for 16 years, Julia. It should not have been this hard. And her Lancaster address a couple of years ago, where Brexit meant Brexit, and then, no deal was better than a bad deal. All of these things resonated at the time. And the duty of government is to put a plan on the table that's in Britain's best interests. But there seems to have been a derogation of duty. There's no real no deal option here. It's 11 minutes to midnight. There's chaos in the parliament. There's behaviour that I think is very questionable from people like the Speaker. But you should square your shoulders, Britain, put something on the table and walk away. Bugger Europe. They need you far more than you need them. And I just think, bit of bulldog spirit there. I want to see Britain look and sound like it used to look and sound.
Well, we were told, as I'm a Leave voter, we were told by the Leave campaigners that, Europe needs us more than we need them. We're going to be offered a great deal. We haven't been offered a great deal. So is that really true?
But they were never going to offer you a great deal. They can't afford to have countries leave. You are always going to get a dodgy deal. And that's exactly what she's got on the table.
You think whoever had been in charge, if Matthew Doyle's former boss, Tony Blair had been in charge, if Tony Abbott, your former boss, had been in charge, no one would have got a good deal from the EU?
I think your deal should have been that you led the negotiations, you put your terms on the table and were prepared to walk away a lot earlier than you have.
Do you think the fact that the Prime Minister talked about no deal better than a bad deal, but clearly what she parted in the negotiations, she didn't mean it?
Her heart wasn't in it. That was a negotiating ploy. And the idea that the sequencing of your negotiations, that you agreed to the divorce payment from the get-go, I mean, whoever does that? Who does that? Would you see Trump do that? You certainly wouldn't have seen Tony Abbott do that.
Given that we are where we are, we can all agree, I think we wouldn't want to start from here. I think even Theresa May might not want to start from here. What should we do now?
You should plan for a no-deal Brexit.
And it looks like there have been efforts in the Commons this week to try and prevent planning going ahead, ability to change tax rules and the like being impeded by votes in the House of Commons. Should the government go ahead nevertheless?
Yes, it should. And you shouldn't respond to the scaremongering. I mean, we have seen this from Australia, where we are a small, large in geographic terms, but a small trading country. But we trade with the world. We trade with the EU on WTO rules, $70 billion a year.
Well, how on earth do you do
that?
I thought that was impossible, we've been told, surely.
Yeah, and we don't have our drugs stopped at borders. Now, we line in a queue at Heathrow. If you guys have to have some sort of schmozzle for a couple of months after the end of March, so be it. I mean, so be it. Why are you scared of all of that? You once were a sovereign nation. I'd argue you're not a sovereign nation now. You will soon be a sovereign nation again. Grit your teeth and get on with it.
Do you think that perhaps the Australian spirit perhaps is what's needed here in the UK? A little bit more national pride?
I think you shouldn't be apologetic about leaving Europe and regaining your sovereign brand again. I think you should be pleased to do deals around the world for trade agreements. When Tony Abbott came to office, there had been 10 years of negotiations on a deal with China. He said, thumped the table in his cabinet meeting, this deal will be done within 12 months, and it was. Australia would do a free trade agreement with Britain tomorrow, as would many other nations. Just get on with it.
Now, of course, when you worked for Tony Abbott, I mean, he had his own problems. I mean, Australia has seen an awful lot of change in terms of prime ministers and leaders in recent years. What do you make of Theresa May's leadership?
I think the nicest thing you can say is that she has survived. Because, I was thinking last night, what is her legacy? What will be her legacy? Her legacy will be survival. But there's not much leadership in that legacy. And I say this as a woman. She's a Conservative. I'm a Conservative. I would want her to have done better in the job. And I think calling the election when she did was just was a chaotic move.
Are you surprised at how bad a Prime Minister she's been?
Early signs, I thought she would be better than she has been.
Well,
yes.
And the polls suggested that she was massively popular with the country.
Yeah, no. I think that she's pulled too much into herself, too much inside Downing Street and too much on her desk. And, resignations of ministers and all of these things lend a sense of chaos.
Who do you think would be a better leader?
Or, as I said, I'm not going to give advice from a long, long way away.
I'm not saying who they should elect, but who do you think? Who do you personally? Who's rated in Australia?
Well, all the usual names that you talk about here are thrown up in Australia. I just think you need backbone again.
Whoever it is.
Whoever it is.
And would Jeremy Corbyn, if we did end up seeing the government fall, we did end up seeing a general election, Jeremy Corbyn being elected as a Prime Minister, do you think he'd be a good leader?
I think he'd be appalling. I think he's the most socialist leader, truly socialist to his sort of entrails that we've seen in a very long time. Is that the modern Labor Party? I would suspect not. Is that their supporter base? Possibly, particularly with young people who don't have a lived experience of socialism. But certainly inside the parliament on the Labor benches, there are still Blairite types you'd hope that would bring some common sense and ballast back into the Labor Party. But Corbyn as a leader would be diabolical.
There's also talk about that the Tory MPs and others would do anything to prevent a general election and Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. In terms of risks to the country, a Corbyn premiership or Brexit, which is worse?
I think they've just got to get on with Brexit, deal with Brexit. What people will see, like the Y2K bug and everything else, I'm old enough to remember all of that, you'll get to the other side of it. The trains will still run on time or near enough to time. The sun will still come up and go down at night. All of these things will happen. They said to us in 2013, you get rid of that carbon tax, Australia, you'll be a international pariah, your energy grid will fall apart, etc., etc. Now, we removed a carbon tax and we survived the other side of it. Now, there's a calamity in some of our energy policy now, but you've got to stand for something when you've got the job of government, and the people voted 52-48, couldn't have been clearer. And they want the leaders to get on with it.
Well, let's talk about another policy that's been in the news lately, certainly over the Christmas period as well, with the issue of migration. Of course, we had the big migration in 2015 post-Syria that led to huge changes across Europe and a huge reaction politically from voters in terms of the doors being opened. We're now seeing, instead of migrants just crossing the Mediterranean to try to get to Italy, Spain and Greece, we now see migrants travelling from France across the Channel to the UK. We've had a case only this week where we had some 27 men found in the back of a lorry on the M6 near Stoke-on-Trent. No one has any idea what the numbers truly are. It's probably what Donald Trump would call a crisis. Now, whether or not it is a crisis or not, immigration and illegal immigration in particular has been a big issue in Australia, but you were part of a government that had I would say a very hard line on this. Tell us what Australia did and how that might work here in the UK.
So you go back into the Howard years and there was a lot of boat arrivals, predominantly coming out of Indonesia, but they were not Indonesian. They had people who had come out of the Middle East and had got themselves down to Indonesia to get to Australia for an outcome. Many of them were not migrants, illegal migrants, asylum seekers in the truest sense of the word. They were not found to be refugees. They were people looking for an economic outcome. Now, I suspect many of the migrants coming your way are much the same. They're not fleeing persecution. If they were, they would be safe in France, and under all the UN rules, they could apply for asylum in Europe where they are safe. But they're forum shopping. They're wanting an outcome in the United Kingdom. That's what happened in Australia. We had 50,000 illegal migrants arrive in about a 4-year period. We were overwhelmed with boats. There were over 1,000 deaths at sea that we know of. It's pretty treacherous between Indonesia and Australia. And Tony Abbott was elected in 2013 on a platform of stopping the boats. Now, everybody said, just like everyone says Brexit will be a calamity without a deal, everybody said you cannot stop these world and global flows. These people will still come. It's impossible under international law. Of course, that's not true. And he stopped the boats. There has not been a boat arrival in Australia for 5 years. Now, before we get all the bleeding hearts say that we're not being generous in terms of supporting refugees that are in strife around the world, Australia has one of the highest per capita intake outtakes of refugees, declared UNHCR refugees. And last year, our net overseas migration was 240,000 people. So we are a very generous country, one of only 27 in the world that resettles migrants. But we will decide who comes to this country, Australia, and how they come. That was the mantra of John Howard. And it's been backed in by the Australian population on the left and on the right ever since.
And do you think that's something that perhaps we could learn lessons from here in the UK?
I think you have to have a better solution than you do now of anguishing about what's coming over the channel and whether or not they should come or shouldn't come, and you put boats out there or not put boats out there. I mean, Sajid Javid was right the other day to say that once they are in once they are in France, they're in a position of safety. And coming to Britain is for an outcome beyond just well-founded fear of persecution.
Okay. Just finally, before I let you go, Peta Credlin, you've been involved in politics in Australia for many, many years. You say you're a journalist now, you're an anchor at Sky News Australia. A word of advice to people listening right now about what's going to happen with Brexit. Return to that big issue. What should British voters do? What should, if you're, not to tell us what to do, but your thoughts, your advice on what we should do now in terms of instructing our political leaders about what should happen?
Well, the political leaders actually have their instructions. They had their instructions in the referendum. And this idea that there is a second referendum, a debate on the table, the establishment don't get to have multiple votes. They don't get to replicate democracy just to get the outcome that they might want. That's the real problem here. And I think British people need to speak very loudly. We told you once, we're not going to tell you again.